But I'm going to go ahead here and just introduce you guys to this calendar that I created. So I wanted to advance the time system. And so originally, the time system had 2 stars and there was a lot of different things going on. And so this new time system is very, very much, it's very elaborate. There's a ton of stuff going on here. So if you're looking through here, I've got a Zodiac. There's a full-fledged Zodiac. There's a list of planets. And you can zoom in and out of the solar system and look at, where they are at any given time. So there's a central star. There's different, the orbital satellites, aka planets and dwarf planets orbiting it. You can enter any Gregorian time period. You can see here, I can just travel through the Gregorian calendar month by month, and you can see what time that is in Graal time. And so this is the Antago calendar. And so what I ended up doing was I created a bunch of months. So there's a lineup of month names. I have that listed over here in the side somewhere. Where is that at? So here's the month lineup, and you can also see that there's weekdays. So there's weekdays, there's months, there are planets, there are zodiac signs, and all of this stuff can be translated into from Gregorian into Antagon and Antagon back into Gregorian time. So this is basically Graal time. And this also has deeply embedded into it a description or an illustration of the time system as it was in Graal 2001. So in Graal 2001, as the planet was orbiting between 2 different stars, I kind of wanted to give it a twist based on what I figured out about, Stefan and Unix Mad, and based upon just a lot of the different events that have happened throughout Graal history. I wanted to just evolve the time system and make it more mathematical, make it more set in stone so that you can do stuff with it and that it's independent from, Stefan and Unix Mad's control, independent from anything of that sort. And it actually accounts for a lot of the events in Graal history. It accounts for the Graal 2001 time period, and it accounts for different events that have lined up with. It's hard to explain. It's really hard to explain because we're talking about two different time systems, right? So we've got Gregorian real world, and then we have, the Antagon Graal time calendar. So at some point, Graal is apparently orbiting 2 astrological spherical bodies. So like if you go through these different timelines, you can find out all kinds of stuff. So you can find out what the zodiac age is currently. I don't know if you guys have any of you have heard of the precession of the equinox in real time. So like a little known thing about me is I had spent decades studying astrology and time and all that stuff. So like I really understand, probably more than most people in this community, how astrology works in tandem with astronomy, and I understand a lot more about astronomy, I think, than a lot of people here. I'm not going to say I'm an astronomer or trying to be an astronaut or anything, but like I studied astrology for a very, very long time. And I have, done astrological readings for people. And so anyways, the precession of the equinox is a huge part of the time period and how it's measured in human history. So like presently we're in the age of Aquarius. Like people have called me mentally ill for saying that. Like there's nothing mentally ill about it. Literally, it's just the precession of the equinox because the earth is on a tilt. And I think that there's people in this community who are so, like, they're raised religious. I think they're almost like Amish. Like a lot of the people in this community, as psycho as they are, they remind me of like crazy psycho Amish faggots who like had these parents who told them that they could just do whatever they wanted and shut people up if they didn't like what they had to say, or try to like ruin them if they didn't like their beliefs because it didn't line up with their Amish beliefs or something. Like this is just normal stuff. Like the age of it was the age of Pisces that we were just in, and we're entering into the age of Aquarius. And so the age of Pisces was, supposedly calibrated back around toward the year zero. It wasn't technically, but it kind of just got set that way when they reset the Gregorian calendar back to zero. So that aligns with this technical date, which was actually about like 7 BC, but I don't want to go into that right now. But anyway, so before that, it was the age of Aries. And then before that, it was the age of Taurus. And so it's interesting because if you look through history, there's in the age of Taurus, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is, has the bull of heaven. And then the age of Aries had the Lamb of God. And then the age of Pisces had, the Fisher of Men, because Pisces are fish and Aries is a lamb and Taurus is a bull. So we have like these different like things that is celebrating the different zodiacal time periods. And we're now entering into the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is, basically it's the age of the Holy Grail. And so I find the Graal community to be interesting in that respect because Ganymede, who is the sign of Aquarius, is so basically he's the water bearer, and he holds up the cup, but he was also like he would like deliver the drinks to the gods. And so that cup is basically what is represented by the age of Aquarius. And I mean that literally, like this is just real-time Gregorian. And because like the earth is on a tilt, every, I think, 2,155 years or something, or 2,157 years, roughly, it's not always perfect because there's different, astrological bodies, different satellite planets that are pulling on with like the centrifugal gravity force from like Saturn and Jupiter, that are pulling on the axial precession, and they're kind of like modulating the way that the rotation of the zodiac in the night sky seasonally is changing. So it's not a perfect thing, but on average it's about 2,157 years. The zodiac will have shifted an entire 30 degrees in the sky. So when we're looking at the zodiac in the real world, we're looking at when people say, hey, I'm a Leo or I'm a Capricorn, what they're actually technically saying is, on the day that I was born, if you were staring directly at the sun on the zodiacal plane, the solar plane of the system, the constellation behind the sun was Capricorn, or the constellation behind the sun was Cancer. And you can find that out typically through the solar date, because the sun is, because the calendar is based off of the solar position, right? The sun's position. So if you're going, through day by day, you can have different birth periods where it's like, well, during this birth period, this, from this day of the month to this day of the month, there's a 30-degree section of the sky that aligns with that sign. So therefore we know that that is what your sun sign is. So when people are saying I'm a Cancer, what they're basically saying is I was born during the time of the solar calendar when the sun was in a particular position of the zodiacal astrological plane, the planar of the solar system. And so that can be calibrated, but again, because of the axial precession, because of the tilt, over time that begins to slowly drift. And so over the last 2,000 years, because the original calendar of the Gregorian calendar had adopted a lot of Babylonian systems, because a lot of what we understand about the cosmos has been, adopted from the Sumerians through the the Babylonian texts and all that stuff. So our zodiacal system is slightly drifting because that was so fucking long ago. And so where we're at now is the Western world did not keep up with that, because a lot of people from the West moved over here and they started selling ancient Babylonian horoscopes to people because they were stupid. And I've gotten into many arguments with people about this. Like there's people who will argue, and this is all going to relate to the Graal calendar, so pay attention. There's people who get into like arguing with me about it, and they'll be like, oh, it's not inaccurate. Like I knew this person who lived in Salem, and they were doing horoscopes and stuff for people, and we were getting in this argument about it, and they were so angry because I just said that I don't believe in tropical astrology. I follow, sidereal Hindu Lahiri, the sidereal. Sorry, the word's escaping me, but that calibration time system for the astrological charts because it's real time. And he's like, no. He's like, you don't even fucking understand. And he's like, went on this big spiel about the origins of astrology in the United States. And like, after like 20 minutes of screaming at me on the phone, I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. But that still doesn't change the fact that sidereal is real time. And at the end of the day, tropical astrology had never had any business in horoscopes. Because real time is real time. It doesn't matter what your opinion is, whether or not we agree on the logistics of why it ended up that way. Sidereal is real time, and I'm always going to go off of real time. And so, people are really, really like, they will lie to your face about it, and they'll just be like, tropical is the only thing that's real. And they just believe that the calendar is cemented at this point in time and it never changes. And that's inaccurate, because if you go into the East, they're using sidereal. I'm using sidereal. People pronounce it differently. Some people say sidereal. Some people say sidereal. Some people say sidereal. It's got a bunch of different pronunciations, but I say sidereal time period. Yeah. So I've always been on sidereal since I understood how astrology works, and that goes back decades. I've been on the sidereal astrological calculations, since I think my early 20s. I don't believe in anything different than that, because what happened is, because of that tilt, a lot of people, when the West started getting conquered and cultivated, a bunch of immigrants from Europe and stuff ended up coming over here, and especially in areas like Salem, Massachusetts, they started selling horoscopes and astrology to the masses, and they started publishing them in newspapers, because remember, the printing press had become pretty new at this point, to where they were now like mass producing newspapers and stuff. That was kind of a new thing in humanity. And so it was available at the time that the West had become a Europeanized civilization. And around that time period, a lot of the people who were selling, more New Age stuff in Massachusetts, and I don't have any issue with that. I like New Age stuff. But, astrology is not really New Age, but it is, it is to people who were in the Judaic system. And so anyway, they were using tropical charts from old Babylonian texts. Like, it was way out of fucking date, dude. You're talking about 2,000-year-old astrological fucking calculations. That's insane. Like, you can't take a chart of the sky from 2,000 years ago and have it be accurate. It's just not going to work. Like, the axial precession guarantees, especially over 2,000 years, that the slow drift of the solar position is absolutely fucking guaranteed. And so everything is like cemented and sewn, and they make up all kinds of excuses for it. People will be like, no, we're going off of tropical because we believe in the seasonals. It's based on the season. No, you're just off. You're using an old ass fucking book from ancient fucking Babylon. The calculations are completely inaccurate. This is from a fucking people before the internet was around. This is from people who started mass introducing ancient Babylonian astrology into the West because they weren't smart enough to understand what sidereal was. Or they understood what sidereal was, but they weren't wise enough to choose that over tropical. And so they invented tropical, basically. And so what we have is, the tropical time system, and that's out of date. And I'm okay with that. I like that idea of that, and I want it to be a part of the, the Galactic Labs and the Graal lore history and all this stuff that I'm creating here in the calendar. But that's what happened is, so, there's a big divide in astrology between tropical and sidereal, because a lot of people, they don't account for, oh my fucking God, dude. You guys, if you understood astrology, you would understand why it's just so much. Because the irony of it all is that the very people who will fucking like try to slit your throat over sidereal versus tropical and swear by the sun and moon that tropical has more validity. They've got their tattoo, their solar tattoo sign tattooed on them, and it's like inaccurate, and they've been selling tropical readings to people for years, and they've got their friends, that they've all pegged in these different, like, you're this and this is what your sign is, and I know it and I understand you. They can't stand to be wrong. So all these new age people who've been on tropical astrology are humiliated, and they just won't admit it that they're wrong. And so anyway, the fucking most ironic part about it is the very people who will try to like kill you over tropical versus sidereal, because they've been pushing tropical for so long and they base their entire world and friendship off of it, and they would just be humiliated to admit that they were wrong. Because imagine like you have all these friends, right? And you're telling them, like, you're just talking about how knowledgeable you are in astrology, and you're like telling them what your sign is, and you're living and breathing the sign, the sign. And when we're talking about what your zodiac sign is, I'm talking about, again, the solar position, the solar sign, because there's a bunch of different signs in your chart, technically, not just the sun sign. But like they're like living and breathing their identity as the sun sign, and they're telling everybody else what their sun sign is, and it's all based off of tropical calculations. And they're like, this powerful kind of narcissistic person who's like, living up, and they're like hanging out at the bars, and they're hanging out at the club scene, and they're hanging out in their hippie circles, and they're hanging out at all these like places. They're going to their poetry readings, and they're just, oh yeah, you're a total Capricorn. I knew it. I could see it inside of you. And they're just like, they have all of this tropical astrology that has defined who they were and built their ego up for decades, and then they find out one day that it's incorrect and has no validity. They're not going to let that go. They're never going to admit to it. They're going to try to shame and destroy people who understand what sidereal astrology is. And so anyways, the irony of it all is that those people who are doing that are also the fucking people who will come to you and tell you that the age of Aquarius is upon us, which is so funny. It's like, how are we entering the age of Aquarius if there is no axial precession and you don't believe in sidereal? And they'll just make up any excuse, or they'll laugh about it and smile about it. And so like, yeah, we're entering the age of Aquarius, and the reason for that is because the age of Pisces was dawning about 2,000 years ago, and around every 2,150 years, where the sky shifts into a new sign. But it's a slow drift, so it's not like, oh, we're here in Pisces and then suddenly we're in another sign. It's like slowly drifting into the new sign. And so by that time passage, we're entirely in a new fucking sign at that point. And so that is what the zodiacal age is. And so anyways, the zodiacal age is very much a real part of human history. You just don't hear about it as much because it's the slowest thing ever. And so much religious people and ignorant people don't know anything about it, but they can't stop it. It's part of the collective human subconscious. You cannot stop it. Like, as ridiculous as it is when people are like, oh, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, this is the age of Aquarius, this is the age of Aquarius, this is the age of Aquarius, we're entering the age of Aquarius. Everybody will sit there and fucking tell you straight up and down that you're fucking psycho, you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about. But all the people who understand how astrology works, those calculations have been set in motion thousands of years ago, and they cannot be changed. They are a part of every system we have in place. And so when we enter the age of Aquarius, even if 90% of the world doesn't believe in it, suddenly they'll all believe in it, because it will just be we're like at the cusp right now of entering into it. So it's so much it's easier to pretend it's not real. It's easier to pretend it's not real. But once we really truly like shift from Pisces into Aquarius, everyone will finally just like accept it, and they'll be like, yeah, we're in the age of Aquarius. But it's such a slow drift that humanity just like doesn't even want to discuss it. But like, they've talked about it in every religion, like, even, and it's a little bit different, but like some people who define like the yugas in Hinduism as the zodiacal ages. And so all this stuff has been happening. It's been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We are entering the age of Aquarius. We are in the age of Pisces right now. And so, the zodiacal ages in Graal, they change also based on the axial precession, the tilt. And so the way that works is, it is calculated and counted here. I don't know why that says A1. That should say something much more different than that. I need to fix that calculation. That shouldn't say A1. I don't know why that says A1. Let me see something here. Yeah, that should not be like that. That needs fixed. This should be calculating which age it is past a certain point. I need to fix that, but that's irrelevant. Ignore that for now. So basically what is happening here is we've got all this time system here, and I've decided that there is no Bomber K and there is no Uniportum. Bomber K existed and Uniportum never did. So Uniportum was technically Antagon. But based upon, different miscalculations of old galactic cosmic. If you haven't seen my other video, I created a video, a couple of things, and these are really like rough and thrown together. But this is still, real stuff. This is me evolving the galactic lore, and this is real as it gets because I own the intellectual property rights to it. This is as real as it will ever get. So the Galactic Labs, they were, mission A through X, they had completed, and so that's known as the X alien people. And they had started this civilization on Earth where they were studying the planet of Graal. And this was, the reason they were going to do that is because there was about to be a cataclysm where the Bomy Moon was about to crash into Graal. And so they wanted to study what was going to happen there. They wanted to be there. And so they made it the last expedition, and it was the Z expedition on A through Z. So there was the A through Z expositions, voyages through space. And they were going to go through 26 of them. And I'm thinking that the reason they were going to do 26 of them is because, in traditional astrology, the number 13 is really powerful because there's 12 zodiac signs and then there's the center of the zodiac. So there are 13 points. And some people even take it to the extreme. They try to include like a fiacus inside of the zodiac to make it 13. Even like with the whole like Christian theology stuff, the number 13 was big. You had the 12 disciples and Jesus at the center. But also in ancient times, I think they had was it Israel? It might have been Israel, or Saturn was at the center of the Wheel of Time. And Israel and Saturn were actually technically like two of the same deity. A lot of people don't know that. Israel was not technically, like what people believe Israel is today is not entirely what its history was. It's a long story. Like I think at one point Saturn was called Israel in ancient time. Like the planet Saturn was called Israel at one point. So like this figure was at the center of the Wheel of Time, and they were known as Father Time, and then they had the 12 signs around them from there. So 13 is a very powerful number, and so what we know about the number 26, A through Z, and a lot of us would be like, well, if they're aliens from a different planet, why would they number their voyages A through Z? And I'm thinking that they weren't. They weren't numbering them A through Z. They were numbering them probably 1 through 13, and there might have been like maybe two parts of the voyages. So this is kind of like something I'm working into the lore here. Is that there was 1 through 13. The number 13 was a huge part in these intergalactic people who were voyaging through these different planets to study the different cataclysmic moments and how they're going to affect the life cycles of the beings there. And so they would go and they would probably starseed it a little bit. They would try to starseed the time periods. Maybe what they were looking for was mass extinctions. Like, because the Bomy Moon was about to crash into the Earth, maybe they were trying to starseed their influence on different planets during what they believed would be moments of mass extinction. And so when they saw the Bomy Moon was going to crash into Graal, this alien race was, going through 1 through 13 different voyages. And I think that there were like 2 aspects to each voyage. And so that comes out to 26, right? So if there's 2 aspects, it's kind of like the yin and yang to the 13 different voyages. And they were star-seeding these mass extinction moments. And so they were studying the population there. They were studying their language, and they're trying to leave information there, and they were trying to influence the next wave of evolution because there was about to be a mass extinction. And so the Galactic Labs the original aliens who inspired the Galactic Labs, whatever it is, civilization that erupted from their presence, they were on Voyage Z, the last voyage of the 13. So there's 1 through 13, and it was the second half of it. So like I had said before, there was Y and Z. And so you have A through X, and then you have Y and Z. So I'm thinking that Y and Z were two parts of the voyage, the same voyage. And so because the alphabet of the Graal, the Graal population was, 26 letters, A through Z, they translated their numbers of their voyages into A through Z because it was the easiest way to relate it back to the language of the people who were there. So you've got 1 through 13, but there's two aspects of it, right? So you got A through X had been completed, so that's why they were, erroneously referred to as the Ax people, the AX people, the alien race, as you saw them in that spaceship beside the brother's house. And then there was the final voyage, and again, there's two parts to each voyage. And so there's the Y and the Z, which was the final part of the 13th voyage. So instead of there being 26 voyages, I think it makes more sense that there was 13 voyages. And there's two parts to each. So there's the yin and the yang. So the yin and the yang is Y and Z of the 13th voyage. And that ended up becoming known as Galactic Labs later in the etymological evolution of their presence in the Graal world, because they had the Z galactic voyage that they were working on, and that was where I think maybe the second part of their mission, so that there's two, like I said, there's a yin and a yang to whatever it is that they're doing, and maybe like it's how they separate the two aspects of the expedition. So you've got the travel, and then you have the destination, right? So you've got the Y expedition is the travel to the Z location, or the final 13th location, and the Z is the second part of that. So you've got the travel, and then you have the arrival. And so the Z was the arrival, where they were going to do all the stuff that they were trying to starseed the planet during what they believed would be a mass extinction. And so that ended up becoming, called the Z Galactic mission. And over time, that got misconstrued by the people, and they believed that there was something called Galactic, and there never was. It was really just a Z Galactic, it was a starseed. And so, anyways, I don't want to go too deep into that just yet. But, yeah, so where was I with that? So yeah, they were starseeding it, and so you ended up with the 1 through 26. And anyways, there was no star called Uniportum. This is what I'm adding to the lore here. There was no Uniportum. Uniportum, I think, was supposedly like an asteroid or something. It was a passing second moon or something, or like a former host. I haven't worked out all the details, but there was something there where Uniportum was originally like there, and then upon further inspection through the ancient literature, they found out that the name of the star in the solar system was not Uniportum, it was Antago. And so that changes everything, because then you have people who are worshipping the Uniportum era are now changing, and the new system realizes that the center of the solar system was the Antago star. And here's where the original time system that I was working on for Graal 2001 starts to take a new twist, guys. This is the fun part. So originally it was working in a figure 8 pattern where you had traveled around the red star, and then you would travel around the yellow star. And I got that inspiration from Pitch Black, only parts of it, not all the details. So in Pitch Black with, Vin Diesel, they were orbiting around two stars. And when they were between the two stars, they would have to like hide out in the caves. Do you remember that? Because it was so hot, the world would burn up, so they had to hide in the darkness. And so when I had created the time system for Graal 2001, I created this idea that there were 2 stars. And I'm completely uprooting that just to add a new twist to the time system. So what I ended up coming up with was that the Uniportum star was actually false. It was actually the Antago star. And Uniportum was actually referring to something else. And so as they looked through the ancient, Galactic texts and stuff, they found out that Uniportum was not a real star. Or something else. It was something else. And so they got the names mixed up and they corrected history there. And then they also found out that Bomber K was not a star. Bomber K wasn't a star either. And you'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So basically there was 1 star. I thought there were 2 stars. Well, here's where it gets fun. And you can see it if you travel back in time here on the calendar. I think it was 2014-ish. Was it 7:30-ish? Let's just go here. So Gregorian time, 2014, 7:14. Where are we at here? Yeah. So if you're looking closely here at this solar system, we can even travel further and further. You can see that there is something called Bomber K on the solar system. So Bomber K existed. It existed here. I can travel back year by year and see if we can find it more. So as we go back further in time, you can see that they're starting to separate. It looked like it was one body, but they're actually separating. So if we go back year by year, you can see here, where are we at? So this is the year 2011 of Gregorian. You can see that they're starting to separate more and more. There's Bomber K, and here's Graal. So Graal had become a moon. If you see where I'm going with this. So when they believed that they were orbiting 2 stars, they weren't actually orbiting 2 stars. And you're like, well, that still doesn't fucking make sense. It does make sense. Pay attention. So what happened was they were orbiting the Antago star, which at this time they believed was Uniportum. It wasn't Uniportum, though. That was a misnaming of celestial bodies through history, and it had been corrected over time. And so Bomber K is the planet, and Graal was orbiting Bomber K. So Bomber K looked massive in the sky, as big as the sun, basically. Bigger than the sun, basically, or the Antago star. It looked bigger. At this time, they believed it was Uniportum. So it looked bigger than the quote-unquote Uniportum star. And so the Bomber K, and after they started to figure out what stuff was, they started correcting the calendar, and this is why, they realized that Uniportum was never real, and they realized that Bomber K was never a star, and that they weren't in a 2-star system. But the ancient people believed that they were. So if you're going back to Gregorian 2001, you're going to find out that they believed that they were orbiting 2 stars. And what happened is that Bomber K is a massive planet. And it's tidal locked. So one side of it is cool, and the other side is not. So basically, it's heating up constantly because the sun is constantly burning on this side of the Bomber K planet. So the Bomber K is tidal. It's a tidal locked planet. So it doesn't spin. It orbits, but the face of it is always facing the star, right? The sun. And so, the Antago star. And so it's always facing it. And the other side of it is where that heat is escaping. So that heat's getting sucked in through the surface, and then it escapes the other side. Because you know how heat travels to cool places, and then it escapes to the cool places, because that's just how the world works. If you put something hot and then you put something cold near it, the heat will travel toward the cool. And so it's the same thing like if you have a warm room and you like leave the door cracked, all of that like heat will try to get sucked out the room, and you'll have that real extremely cold breeze through the door crack. Um, so basically, the other side of Bomber K is erupting, and it's just violently fucking on fire constantly because all of that heat from Antago is being burned into the one side, and it's so massive, and Bomber K is on fire constantly. And it's just this big, it's there's a lot of stuff going on there, and the other half of it is just like always on fire, and always it's magmatic and constantly like all the heat's escaping the other side because all the volcanoes are erupting constantly because the heat is trying to escape. And so you have the other side of Bomber K is constantly on fire. As Graal is orbiting Bomber K, its orbit is in such a way that it sees it sees the star as it orbits, and then as it spins back around, it sees the burning side of Bomber K. So Graal is a moon. Originally, Graal was a moon of Bomber K, and it's orbiting in the perfect kind of like harmony. And people are like, that makes no sense. Why would it be a perfect harmony? Well, stuff like that happens more often than you think, and there's just reasons for it. It's just the way that like the universe works. Like even if you look at like in our sky today, like the moon and the sun, like they're the same size, which is why we're still able to have like a total solar eclipse, which is like, well, why? How can we have a total solar eclipse which makes no sense because you would think that the sun and moon were different sizes. But they're like almost literally exactly the same fucking size in the sky. It's just bizarre. It's just the way life works. It's just a bizarre thing that happens in nature. And it makes you just question life. So the way that this is working is that the numbers are just working out in such a way that Graal is just perfectly orbiting in a way where it sees Antago. And then as it orbits around, it spins around and it sees Bomber K. And so, when it sees the bright side of Bomber K, they believe that it's a star. And then when it sees the star, it believes that there's two stars in the sky. So they see Bomber K and they see Antago. And this is, again, primitives, like a primitive society and stuff. So they believe that they're orbiting two stars, but they're really just orbiting one planet where the other side, as they orbit around it, they flip around it in such a way that they see the fire side. And then when it orbits back around, they see the light side of the sun here. And then it just keeps going around and around. So it has the illusion of orbiting two stars. It's not orbiting two stars at all. It's orbiting a tidal-locked planet where one half of it is on fire constantly. So it's like a yin and yang. So Bomber K is basically a yin and yang. It's dark and on fire. It's like solid rock and also on fire. So that explains like the obsession with the yin and yang, right, in Graal. And so that was just why they thought they were orbiting two stars. They're not. They're just simply not. And there's other, explanations for things I'm not going to go too much into. But if you go back further, you'll see here that we can go back to like the year 2001 here. And you can see that this is before the Bomy Moon crashed. So if you go to, I think it was like September of 2001 Gregorian, the Bomy Moon will have crashed into Graal. So Graal was orbiting as a moon around Bomber K, and so was the Bomy Moon. And eventually the Bomy Moon crashes into Graal. If you go back, like I said, if you go back in time further enough, you can see the moon before it crashes. And you can see Graal before it crashes into the Bomber K. So at some point, Graal crashes into Bomber K, and that's, I think, around July 30th or so, July something of 2014. I'm not going to go too deep into details about that. But around that time period, Graal crashes into Bomber K, and it becomes one body. It becomes one big planet now. And then it has a ring around it. But until that happens, Yeah. So if we go back further, we can go back to like 1999 Gregorian, and you'll see that Graal was separate from Bomber K. Do you see that? So Graal was originally orbiting the same orbit as Bomber K. It's very similar. They were in the same orbital path. And so Graal was separate at this point as a planet, and then Bomber K and Bomy was a planetary and moon system, a planet moon system. So Bomy was originally a moon of Bomber K, which I think works out really well just etymologically, right? Because it's like, oh, they both start with BOM, so Bomber K, Bomy. So think of it that way. At one point, Bomber K was just the planet, and then the moon was Bomy. And then Graal was a separate planet, and they were both in the same orbit. And if we go back further, you can see they just kind of drift further and further apart. But as we approach, let's just go up to, oh wait, that's not a thing. So you can see as we approach that, I believe it's February 2nd of 2001, Graal and Bomber K are now getting closer and closer and closer to a point where at some point they just get caught in each other's orbit. So do you see that as I'm passing the years? Do you see that? If I just hit that year button to pass time, you can see it just gets closer and closer. And there it is. And then they just get caught in each other's orbit. So they get caught in each other's orbit. And so Graal is now a moon of Bomber K, and they believe they're orbiting two stars. They're not. They're not orbiting two stars. And you can see at some point, Bomy hits Graal. And so the Bomy Moon smashes into Graal. And then it just becomes Graal and Bomy. So around this time is... before all this happened is when the Z Galactic mission, or the 13th voyage of this intergalactic people who they don't really have a name yet. They're just known as the Axe people in Graal. But that doesn't mean that that's what they're really called, right? Because they're intergalactic beings. But like on Graal, they're known as the Axe people and the Galactic Labs. But really and technically, in truth, outside of the Graal, lore universe, it's the Z Galactic voyage from they had just finished the A through X voyages, which is the 1 through 12. And there's two sides to each voyage. And so the Y expedition was the first half of the 13th voyage. And then the second half of the 13th voyage was the star seeding. So traveling to Graal was the first half of the 13th voyage, and then landing on Graal and star seeding it was the second half of that voyage. And so you have the Y and the Z. And the Z Galactic, it just ended up becoming confused over time. They thought they were some group of magical, powerful people called the Galactic people, and they weren't. They were just it was a star seeding people. They had come from a more advanced society, a different place, somewhere else in the universe. But they had came to starseed it because Graal was about to crash into Bomy. And so they thought it was going to be this massive cataclysm of extinction. And so they came, and it ended up becoming known as the Galactic. And so, anyways, that happened because Graal was crashing into Bomy. And then you can see here what happens as time goes on. Graal is now just orbiting. You can see that as I pass the years, Graal is just orbiting Bomber K, is just orbiting and orbiting and orbiting and orbiting. And so they believe that there's two stars, but they're not. Bomber K is tidal locked. And so, anyways, over time they figure out that there was only one star. That their Uniportum wasn't real. Uniportum was something else. Antagon is the star. And then they find out that Bomber K isn't a star. It's a tidal locked planet that they've been orbiting. And so they start to develop the time system, and they find out that there's all these other fucking planets in the solar system too, that they've seen in the sky, right? And so they all have these different names and stuff. And so we've got the different planetary names. We've got Antagon, which is a star. We've got Ezradai, Pachuco, Ultima, Mundo, Galena, Signet. Bomber K doesn't exist anymore. Well, it does, but it doesn't. Soon it won't. Soon it won't. At this point, it's now the home planet because Graal has become a moon. But eventually, Bomber K and Graal crash into each other and they become one body. And that's all calculated in here, and you can see it. So that's a long story, which we're not going to go too deep into. But anyway, and then there's Signet, Freck, Wet Light, and Fleet. So there's a bunch of different planets here. And if you do jump forward, like I had said, if we kind of like hopscotch up to... Oops, that's not a real time. Let's do the year 2013. Gregorian. You can see that Bomber K and Graal are now dangerously close together. The orbit was, when Graal got hit by that moon, even though it got caught in Bomber K's orbit, once Bomy crashed into Bomber K, Graal slowly started to down spiral into Bomber K. And so over time, Graal and Bomber K are getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And eventually, you can see here, do you see that? Let me just go back. So let's try it like slow, walk it day by day. You can see as it's passing day by day, you can see they're virtually overlapping each other. They're dangerously close to each other. And then boom. They smash into each other. And the cataclysm fucks the orbit up. So now the orbit switches to an elliptical pattern because of the crash. And so this is a massive crash. So Graal and Bomber K, Graal was originally a planet, and so was Bomber K. And then Graal became a moon. And then it absorbed Bomy, and then it slowly down spiraled into Bomber K. And now Graal and Bomber K are one planet. They crash into each other and they become this massive planet. And they have a big ring. They have a big ring around it now. And so you can see that there's this whole elliptical orbit now. It's no longer moving in a perfect circle. The orbit gets messed up after that big cataclysm. And so if you look at this orbiting here, it's like a big ovular pattern, which means now that around this time, Graal, is now the planet. Bomber K and Graal are now known as Graal. They've got a ring around it because of all the debris after they crashed into each other. And it's thrown off course into this elliptical pattern. And you can see that elliptical pattern kind of changes slowly over time too. But otherwise, it's rather consistent if you travel month by month. But as the years pass, that little ellipse slowly changes too. It just slowly changes. It's the same ellipse. It just slowly, like, what is it? The periapsis changes. So, when it's at its apogee and when it's at its perigee here, this is its apogee. The location of the apogee is changing. Because the periapsis is slowly fucking, drifting. And so as it goes on and on and on, you can see it just keeps rotating. But it's still stuck in that same ovular pattern now. But you can see, if you go through the days here, that you can see how the planet starts to pass the inner planets. And so their orbits are outside of it. And what that ends up allowing things to happen is it gives us a much wider range of zodiacal alignments. Because if there's, I didn't want Graal to be the third planet from the sun. I just thought that was such a boring idea. I thought that would be such a boring idea. I think I just broke something. What the fuck was that? I don't know. I had my elbow on something. I broke something. Not my elbow. Anyways, so yeah, like, if it's so far away, or if it's so close that it's not interesting, right? Because Graal is already the third rock from the sun. So I'm like, let's do something different. And having it like, I think it's like the sixth from the sun now, or something, the sixth or the seventh from the sun. By having it crash into each other and having its orbital pattern get screwed up like that, it ends up allowing the inner planets to be in different signs than normal. Because what happens in astrology is, since the inner planets are always like close to each other, like it's very hard for them to be in different signs. So like if you're born during a particular time of year, the odds of like Mercury and Venus being the same zodiac sign are it's pretty likely. And at most they'll be in two separate signs. At most. And so and there'll be like two signs that are next to each other because they're inner orbits near the sun. So like they can't travel through different farther expanses of the zodiacal placement for astrology, because they're not outside of Earth's orbit. They're on the inside, and so they're always like virtually in the same signs anywhere you are at a specific time of year. But what happens with Graal is that's not always the case. Because now its orbit is elliptical and it's changed, the periapsis is drifting. The inner planets can be in many different signs. Like when it's in here, all of the inner planets can like drift to much further locations on the zodiac. You can even zoom out here and see where the zodiac is, if you see that, based upon where the planet is. And so it can reach these outer, if it's around this planet, you can draw further lines to different places on the zodiac. So it allows for a much wider and interesting array of zodiac signs for the inner planets. And so that is very good, for creativity. But this zodiac changes over, the zodiac age changes, and it's calculated. This number next to it is, again, ignore that for now. I should be calculating which age it's in. It shouldn't just always say 1. I don't know what happened there. But I got to fix that. But anyways, so, AM and FM or AM and PM, sorry, are known, I think, as, is it F and P or something? I don't know. You'll have to check it out. I put it into the calendar. But there's different days of the week. So we've got, for the weekdays, we've got Antadia, Uradia, Vapedia, Zendaya, Athadia, and Androdia. So those are the different days of the week. And for the different months, we have hold on. That's not the full name. Evangel, Klutz, Bridges, Gandar, Craze, Lycia, and Gunman. So we have different months there, and we've got different days of the week, weekdays. We got different astrological alignments. For the zodiac, we have the Axe alien sign. So there's a zodiac. This is a constellation called Axe, and its domicile ruler is Frake. So that's a dwarf planet. And then we have Spider. This is the sign of Spider. This is, because you remember back in Graal, there was like that spider creature. Remember that spider creature, that baddie? They still have them. But like, I think it was in the octopus originally from Zelda, and they changed it to Spider, when they brought it into Graal. And so there's a spider. This is a zodiac sign. It's a constellation. And this is the domicile ruler is Pachoco. And then you have the horse for a zodiac sign, knight, dragon, Erebus, the Lobrum, the Bomy, and the baddie and the angel. So these are the different zodiac signs that we have here. And you can find a quick, brief overlook of them here. So you got, the Bomy, Lobrum, Erebus, dragon, knight, horse, spider, axe, angel, and baddie. And so this changes based upon, the zodiacal age. This little chart here will tell you what the age is and which is where things are starting. But yeah, so they have different domicile rulers and stuff, so you can start to calculate zodiac. So like if you take the zodiac wheel here and you put any different Gregorian time in here, not only can you find out what the Graal Antagon time is, and again, this is the the fuller version of the Graal 2001 time system. I just evolved it finally. So now we've got weekdays, months, zodiac, and a conversion system where you can, convert from Gregorian to this Graal time system. It's got the zodiacal ages. It's got all that stuff. But anyways, you can also look at the zodiac of any specific time. So if you enter any, a time in anywhere, then you can pull up the zodiac wheel. And from the viewpoint of Earth, you can find out where the different signs that all the bodies are in, the different satellites around the star. And so you can select those too. You can click on them. You can find out, what the signs are. You can by hovering over it. So that's the baddie, that's the Bomy, that's the Lobrum. And then you can click on the different planets just to see where they are. And you can see what degrees they're in each sign. Yeah. And so you can find out what your zodiac chart would be for any given time period. And anyway, I'm going to end it there. I think that's a pretty good overview. There's, I guess, no end to your imagination of what you can do with this. You can invent zodiacs. You can start inventing Graal astrology. And you can convert time into zodiac charts, and you can start finding out stuff and exploring lore. But anyway, this is now the evolution of the Graal lore. So the backstory to the original time period from Graal 2001, I finally got around to writing it. It took me, again, one of the reasons why I didn't evolve it is because they stole the game. And then as a child, I didn't realize, that just because a bunch of people are lying and telling you that you no longer have rights to something and that you're not allowed to create anymore over your own stuff and that they own it, doesn't make that true. Like, stealing something does not make it yours. Being a communist and a murderer does not make my stuff yours. So that time system, I'm allowed to evolve it. Nobody else knows that time system anyways. It's my time system. They sold it. They didn't have my permission to. And it's now evolved. I needed to evolve it. And so I have, backstories to why the Bomy Moon collapsed. I have backstories to why the stars were the way they were. And a much more elaborate thing going on here where you can find out and view a whole full-fledged calendar. You can find out what the Zodiac stuff is. You know what I mean? There's a lot going on here now. So this is far more interesting and much more creativity. All right, so I'm going to hop off here, but yeah, I appreciate you all for watching this. I need to get out of this freaking tiny this room that I'm in. I'm in this tiny room where I record stuff because I covered all the walls with acoustic panels. But I got to get out of here. So I'm going to hop out and, good luck. I should probably upload this. Now, typically with my code, I write my code myself. But with this one, I used AI to help write the code, so it's probably a mess. But I'm still going to upload this anyways because I designed the systems. I design, you know, the stars, the zodiac, the astrology, and all that stuff. You have to understand that stuff in order to create something like this. And I have studied astrology for so long. So I was able to create all this, and I was able to make use of AI to help just kind of code the viewer and stuff like that. So this is not like my code, but this is my time system. And so, anyways, I will upload it so that you guys can fuck around with it and have, you know, access to the zodiacs and the time system moving forward. This is official. Again, I'm the one who created the time system. I'm the god of gravity. This is what I do. I create the cosmos. And this is now the new time system. And so, anyway, again, apologies for the mess of code, but, you know, it works.